First Sunday lunch back in 3 years, and Dad said, "Family is everything." 10 minutes later, my stepmother's hand split my lip open in the kitchen. I didn't scream. I just stared at the red recording light on the doorbell camera and felt my smartwatch register the cardiac event. Tomorrow, at the family corporation, my risk management presentation is on transparency. She likes hitting people in the dark. I'm about to flip the lights on in the boardroom. My name is Rowan Hale. I am 31 years old, and I am the head of risk control for Harborline Logistics. Today, I am standing in my father's kitchen in Grayford Ridge, slicing lemon poppy seed scones. The air is thick with the chemical sharpness of industrial-strength lemon cleaner. An odor Marla equates with domestic order. It's a sterile scent that fails to mask the damp, warm breath of the dishwasher as it churns through its final rinse cycle. The machine's rhythmic percussive hum is the baseline for this house, a constant, low-grade agitation that you only notice when it stops. The knife in my hand is German steel, perfectly weighted, a gift from my father years ago. Its edge glides through the soft crumb of the scone, leaving a clean, precise cut. Dad had asked for them. "Just like your mother used to make, row," he'd said. A casual request that was, in reality, a command performance, a test of loyalty and memory. I perform the task with the detached efficiency I apply to a procedural audit. The movements are clean, economical, no wasted motion. Marla drifts into my peripheral vision, a silent cloud of expensive cashmere and subtle, floral perfume. She doesn't approach me from the front. She never does. She prefers the flank, the unguarded side. She leans in, her voice a low, venomous whisper directly into my ear, a frequency calibrated to bypass the ambient noise of the kitchen and drill directly into my brainstem. "Leave the executive voice at the office. In this house, you are the child." Her words are a physical thing, a puff of warm air that smells faintly of mint and condescension. I don't turn, I don't react. I keep my eyes on the blade, on the sprinkle of black poppy seeds against the pale yellow cake. My grip on the knife handle remains steady. My breathing is even, a practiced state of calm I learned for depositions. In, out, control the variables. The motion is a blur, a sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. Her hand comes from nowhere and everywhere at once. It's not a frenzied, emotional strike. It's a piston, hard, fast, and brutally efficient. The crack of her palm against my cheek is sharp, definitive. The force of it whips my head to the side, and the follow-through momentum slams my zygomatic bone into the hard, unforgiving edge of the stainless steel refrigerator. A secondary impact, a dull, metallic thud resonates through my skull, vibrating down my teeth. For a split second, the world is a kaleidoscope of bright, searing white light and the deafening hum of the refrigerator's compressor, high above, triggered by a plume of oil vapor from the forgotten frying pan on the stove. The delicate mechanism of the smoke alarm trembles almost imperceptibly, a tiny sympathetic vibration in the manufactured calm of the house. The first sensation to return is the taste. Copper, the unmistakable, metallic tang of blood blooming on my tongue where my teeth have cut the inside of my lip. The pain is a distant signal, a data point to be logged and analyzed later. It's a dull, throbbing ache that begins in my cheekbone and radiates outwards, a seismic event with an epicenter just below my eye. I don't raise a hand to my face. I don't cry out. My training, my entire professional and personal ethos, screams one thing: do not contaminate the evidence. Do not escalate. Observe. My gaze, steady and deliberate, lifts from the floor. I bypass Marla's face, denying her the satisfaction of seeing my reaction. Instead, I find my target. Across the kitchen, mounted beside the back door, is the Nest Bell. Its small, circular lens is a black, unblinking eye, and just to its left, a tiny pinprick of crimson light pulses with a slow, steady rhythm. Recording. The angle is perfect. It captures the entire kitchen entryway, the refrigerator, the space where we are standing. It saw the motion. It recorded the sound. It is an impartial, electronic witness. Simultaneously, a distinct haptic buzz vibrates against the bones of my left wrist. I don't need to look down to know what it is. My smartwatch. A notification glows on its small screen. One I've seen before during high-stress simulations. Irregular heart rate detected. An event has been logged at your current location. It has captured the spike in my pulse from a resting 68 to a sudden adrenalized 142 beats per minute. It has geotagged the event with the precise GPS coordinates of my father's house. Time-stamped, biometrically verified. Another witness. This one strapped directly to my body. I don't move. I let the moment stretch, letting the data streams upload to their respective clouds. Visual, audio, biometric, locational, a complete, multi-layered record of the last 7 seconds. I am no longer just a victim. I am a collection point. My body is the scene of the incident, and it is being meticulously documented. My voice, when I finally use it, is devoid of emotion. It is the same tone I use to question a non-compliant vendor or flag a suspicious transaction. "Are we still taking a family photo for the local paper after lunch?" I ask, turning my head slowly to face her. I raise my index finger to my mouth and delicately wipe away the single bead of blood that has welled on my lower lip, examining it for a moment before wiping it on a napkin. A perfect little crimson smear on the pristine white paper. Marla's face is a mask of controlled fury. Her eyes narrowed, her lips a thin, bloodless line. My refusal to break, to scream, to give her the emotional currency she craves, has infuriated her more than any physical retaliation could. The calculated, almost banal nature of my question throws her off balance. She expected tears. She got a logistical inquiry. Inside my head, the audit has already begun. A chain of control is forming, each link forged in cold, hard logic. Timestamp, 12:43 p.m. Sunday. Witnesses. 1 digital, Nest Bell. 1 biometric, smartwatch. Physical evidence. Contusion forming on left cheekbone. Laceration inside lip. Location, 114 Willow Creek Lane. Grayford Ridge. The pieces are slotting into place, not for a family drama, but for a formal incident report. This wasn't just an assault, it was a data-rich event. The swinging door from the dining room pushes open, and my father steps into the kitchen. Graham Hale, founder and CEO of Harborline Logistics, a man who built an empire on predictability and control. He is holding 2 empty water glasses, his brow furrowed with mild annoyance. What's going on in here? What was that noise? His eyes scan the room, missing the critical details, sensing only the shift in emotional tenor. Marla's transformation is instantaneous. The rage vanishes, replaced by a performance of wifely concern. She smooths her cashmere sweater and forces a light, tinkling laugh that sounds like breaking glass. "Nothing, darling. Rowan just wasn't paying attention and bumped right into the cabinet door. So clumsy." She places a hand on my arm, a proprietary gesture meant to convey affectionate exasperation. The pressure of her fingers on my bicep is a threat. I meet my father's gaze. His eyes flicker to my face, and for a microsecond, they register the rapidly forming discoloration on my cheek. A flicker of something, concern, confusion, crosses his features before it's suppressed. He wants the simple answer. He wants Marla's version to be true. It requires nothing from him. I offer him a different version, not an accusation, not a plea, a correction to the record. I give him a fact, stripped of all sentiment. "Yes," I say, my voice clear and steady. "And the cabinet has a left hand." My father is Graham Hale, the founder and CEO of Harborline Logistics, in the sterile, manicured ecosystem of Grayford Ridge. Harborline isn't just a company, it's a civic institution, the town's model of American success. Graham built it from 2 trucks and a leased warehouse into a regional powerhouse, a testament to relentless efficiency and a public-facing image as solid and dependable as the concrete floors of his distribution centers. He is a man who believes in clean lines, clear directives, and the unimpeachable logic of a well-managed balance sheet. And at his side, both at home and in the corner office, is Marla, my father's second wife, and Harborline's chief people officer. The board approved her appointment 2 years after the wedding, a move presented as a masterstroke of cultural engineering. Marla became the corporate matriarch, the self-styled goddess of company culture. She speaks in the fluent, aspirational language of HR summits, weaving narratives of empowerment, synergy, and belonging. She is the soft power to my father's rigid operational authority, the velvet glove on the iron fist. I am not a product of that glove. My presence at Harborline is an anomaly, a variable my father hadn't planned for. I wasn't a legacy hire, handed a title and a corner office as a birthright. I arrived 5 years ago through the side door. Part of the package when Harborline acquired a smaller data analytics firm where I was working. I wasn't Rowan Hale, the CEO's daughter. I was R. Hale, a line item on an acquisition spreadsheet, an auditor in a mid-level internal control unit. I earned my way up, not by invoking my last name, but by being better at untangling fraudulent vendor contracts and tracing phantom inventory than anyone else. My promotion to head of risk control was based on a portfolio of quietly, ruthlessly executed audits that saved the company millions. My father acknowledged it with a firm handshake and a brief, formal email, the same as he would for any other high-performing employee. It was, in its own way, the highest compliment he could pay me. To the outside world, we are the embodiment of the dream. The Hale family of Grayford Ridge. Every Thanksgiving, the cover of the Grayford Ridge Chronicle's Sunday magazine features us. Last year's photo is still framed on the mantel. Dad, looking stoic and proud. Marla, radiant in a cream-colored sweater, her hand resting possessively on his arm, and me, positioned slightly to the side, a polite, professional smile fixed on my face. We are the poster family for American success, a living, breathing brand extension of Harborline itself. This seamless blend of the personal and the professional is by design. At home, the illusion of perfection is maintained with the same rigor as a quarterly earnings report. The dinner table is always perfectly set, the silverware heavy in your hand, the steak knives engraved with a tasteful H. Conversations are polite, managed, and rarely deviate from safe, pre-approved topics, market trends, sailing club regattas, charity galas. In the corporate lobby, the same ethos is carved into a large granite plaque. Integrity, transparency, respect. The values of the company and the supposed values of our home are one and the same, a closed loop of impeccable branding. Marla is the chief architect of this illusion. She personally authored Harborline's Code of Conduct, a comprehensive document filled with strong, unequivocal statements against workplace harassment and intimidation. She leads the mandatory annual workshops on violence prevention, her voice resonating with practiced sincerity as she discusses the importance of creating a psychologically safe environment for all team members. She is an expert orator on the subject of safety, dignity, and respect. She is brilliant at saying all the right words. Over the years, working in the shadows of her corporate reign, I learned a fundamental truth of power. The person who writes the internal laws is the first to know where all the loopholes are. They design the system, so they know its vulnerabilities better than anyone. They know which clauses have no teeth, which policies are unenforceable, and which transgressions are impossible to report. My relationship with my father exists within this carefully constructed world. It is like a sheet of tempered glass, perfectly transparent, impressively strong, and capable of bearing immense weight. From the outside, it looks like a solid, clear connection, but we both know the truth about tempered glass. Its strength is a lie. It is strength under tension. All it takes is one precise, well-aimed strike at a single, vulnerable point, and the entire structure doesn't bend or crack. It shatters. It explodes into 1,000 tiny, irreparable pieces. That is why, standing in the kitchen with the ghost of her handprint on my face, I chose not to run to him. Telling him would be useless. It would be my word, my emotion, my pain, against Marla's carefully crafted narrative. She would frame it as a misunderstanding, a moment of family tension. She would call me overwrought, emotional, ungrateful. She would apologize to him with tears in her eyes for letting things get out of hand, and he, a man who despises emotional complexity, would accept her version because it is the easier path. He would see a filtered copy of the event, edited and curated by the perpetrator. I wanted him to see the original file, the raw data, uncorrupted by interpretation or excuse. I wanted him to see the nest bell footage, the cold, impartial recording of a hand moving through space. I wanted him to see the graph from my smartwatch, the clean, undeniable spike of a heart under attack. I wanted him to see evidence, not an argument. In my world, the world of risk and control, you do not react with emotion. You do not engage in screaming matches. A physical blow is not answered with another physical blow. An assault like this, in this house that is so deeply intertwined with the corporation, is not just a personal violation. It is a breach of protocol. It is a catastrophic failure of the systems Marla herself purports to champion. And so, my decision was made in the silent, throbbing space between the impact and my father's arrival. This would not be settled with tears or shouts in a suburban kitchen. This would be handled according to a different code. My revenge would not be delivered by a raised hand. It would be delivered by process. Harborline Logistics is not a family company. Not really. It is a data-driven empire that happens to be run by my father. It's a vast, sprawling network of federal truck fleets, automated sorting hubs, and massive third-party logistics contracts managing inventory across the entire Midwest and Eastern Seaboard. Everything moves on a dashboard. Every truck is a moving data point, its telematics broadcasting speed, fuel consumption, and driver hours of service in real time. Every warehouse sensor reports temperature, humidity, and throughput. We don't guess. We measure. Everything is governed by key performance indicators, defined by service-level agreements, and recorded in an immutable audit trail. My world is the nervous system beneath that skin. As head of risk control, I don't manage the trucks. I manage the invisible lanes of control that keep the company from bleeding out. My team hunts for ghosts in the machine: vendor fraud, conflicts of interest, bribery, data breaches, and occupational safety risks. We cross-reference driver fatigue logs against their dispatch manifests. We analyze fuel purchase locations against GPS routing data. We look for the patterns that signal a system being manipulated. The heart of this operation is our enterprise resource planning system, the digital ledger where every corporate action is etched, every new vendor approval, every purchase order modification, every payment authorization. It all requires a login, a password, and a multi-factor authentication. The ERP logs it all. It creates a digital fingerprint for every employee. You cannot move a dollar or a box in Harborline without leaving a trace. I am the master of reading those traces. But every system has a black box, an area intentionally left opaque. At Harborline, that box is employee wellness. It falls under Marla's domain as Chief People Officer, and it's an area few in finance or audit dare to probe too deeply. The spending is classified as sensitive, protected by a veil of employee privacy and medical confidentiality. Marla has exceptional signatory authority over this budget, a power granted to her by the board to act decisively in the interest of our people. It's a discretionary fund with minimal oversight, a gaping vulnerability in an otherwise hardened system. I've been watching that vulnerability for 94 days. It started as a flicker on my team's anomaly dashboard, a non-seasonal spending spike. In the last fiscal quarter, expenditures under the Wellness Partnership Cost Center had increased by 240%. There was no corresponding increase in insurance claims, no new company-wide health initiative, no spike in short-term disability. It was a 240% deviation from the mean, and it was climbing. I drilled down. The payments were all directed to a single new vendor, Arcadia Wellness Group. My analyst ran a standard KYC, Know Your Customer, background check. Arcadia Wellness Group was not a major healthcare provider. It wasn't a known clinical practice. Its corporate address was a UPS store mail drop in a strip mall 2 towns over. The contract, which I pulled from the digital archives, was a boilerplate document, thin on deliverables and specific outcomes. It hadn't been routed through legal. It hadn't been vetted by procurement. It bore only 2 sets of initials, a low-level HR manager and Marla's final approval signature. The audit committee, to their credit, had noticed the spike as well. I saw their automated query in the system log. I also saw Marla's response, a masterpiece of corporate deflection. She classified it as a discretionary post-pandemic mental health pilot, a rapid response program to address employee burnout. She cited the critical need for confidentiality as the reason for the single-source vendor and the non-standard contract. The committee, wary of overstepping into HR's sensitive territory, accepted her explanation and closed the query. I did not. The data signature was wrong. The justifications were all narrative, no metrics. I placed a silent monitoring flag on the Arcadia vendor account, all related cost centers, and Marla's own user credentials. This wasn't a standard audit flag, which would have triggered an alert for her. This was a deep system trace, every time she or anyone in her department accessed a file related to Arcadia. Every email that mentioned the name, every payment request she approved, a perfect, read-only mirror of that data was being copied in real time to a secure, isolated server under my control. I was building a case, letting her operate in the belief that her black box was still dark. I was waiting for the pattern to become undeniable. Then came the slap in the kitchen. That single violent act changed everything. It shifted the timeline from when to now. It was no longer an abstract financial investigation. It was a direct, physical threat. The slap was the key data point I was missing. It provided context. This wasn't just greed. It was about volatility and a complete disregard for boundaries. A CPO who can assault a family member in her own home, a family member who is also a senior employee, is a catastrophic liability. Her lack of personal control was a direct threat to the corporation. What would she do to a junior accountant who stumbled upon the Arcadia invoices? Her capacity for violence, now proven and documented, turned financial fraud into a potential workplace safety and coercion crisis. The kitchen incident became my event zero. The mace-like taste of blood in my mouth wasn't just pain. It was the trigger, the go-live signal. As I stood there, logging the biometric spike on my watch, the 72-hour plan began to form in my mind, a critical path analysis clicking into place. This was no longer a passive audit. It was an active neutralization of a high-level internal threat. 72 hours, that's the window. Enough time to assemble the complete data package, but not enough time for her to sense the investigation and begin destroying the evidence. My plan wouldn't move through my father. It would bypass him completely. First, an internal escalation to the 2 people who were legally bound to act, bypassing the standard chain of command, Harbor Line's general counsel and the independent chair of the audit committee. I would present the case as a dual threat, a material financial irregularity and a demonstrable workplace violence risk from a senior officer. Second, an external engagement. I would package my findings for Orion and Vale, our independent, outside auditing firm. They were the ones Marla had already lied to. They would not be pleased. Their involvement would trigger a formal, independent investigation that would strip Marla of all authority to control the narrative. Third, the federal track, the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, for the assault, framed as a severe breach of workplace safety and harassment policy, where the lines between home and office are blurred by corporate structure, and, depending on what the final numbers showed, a preliminary file for the SEC, fraud is fraud, even when it's disguised as wellness. The clock started the moment I wiped the blood from my lip. The slap wasn't just an attack, it was an authorization. She had just given me the justification I needed to open every locked door. The family lunch disintegrated after my father's non-committal grunt. He retreated to his study, a room insulated from domestic disturbances, leaving Marla to savor her victory in the dining room. I excused myself, citing a headache. The lie was a courtesy, a thin veneer of normalcy. The throbbing in my cheekbone was a hard, physical fact. I didn't go to my old bedroom. I went to my car. A late-model Audi sedan parked in the driveway, a sterile, neutral space that was mine alone. I engaged the soundproofing by turning the engine on, the quiet hum a counterpoint to the dishwasher's thrum inside. I connected my phone to the car's secure hotspot. The first priority was data preservation. I logged into my Nest account. My father had added me years ago. For security, the cloud subscription retained a 30-day rolling history. I found the event log for the backdoor camera. 12:43 p.m. I hit play. The wide-angle lens captured the kitchen entryway perfectly. The video quality was high definition, the colors vivid, the sterile white of the cabinets, the black granite. I saw my own back, the rigid line of my shoulders. I saw Marla, a blur of cashmere, step into my space. The motion was fast, her arm a pale arc. Because of the angle, the point of impact was obscured by my own head, but the audio was crystalline. The high-sensitivity microphone picked up everything, the low hum of the refrigerator, her whispered words, and then the sharp, percussive thwack of her hand connecting with my face. It was an ugly, definitive sound, followed by the metallic thud of my head hitting the refrigerator. I downloaded the file, a 45-second MP4 clip. I rewatched it once, analyzing the sound wave. The audio was the key. It was unambiguous. I saved it to my encrypted drive under the case file name I had just created in my head, Project Arcadia. Next, my wrist, I opened the health app on my phone and synced my smartwatch. The data populated instantly. A vertical red line shot up the heart rate graph at 12:43 p.m., jumping from a resting 68 to 142 in a single beat. It was a cardiac signature of shock. I navigated to the motion sensor logs. The accelerometer, designed to detect falls or car crashes, had registered a hard impact event at the same timestamp. It had logged the G-force of my head hitting the steel appliance. I exported the raw data as a time-stamped CSV file and added it to the Arcadia folder. GPS coordinates, heart rate, impact force, a complete biometric record of an assault. The physical evidence was next. I drove to my apartment, a sterile glass and steel box downtown, a place Marla had never been. In the white, unforgiving light of my bathroom, I began the chain of custody protocol for the injury. I held a small, plastic forensic ruler, a standard item in my risk assessment go bag, against the blossoming contusion. The skin was broken where it had hit the refrigerator handle's edge. I took a series of high-resolution photographs with my phone, ensuring the timestamp metadata was enabled. Wide angle of my face, close-up of the bruise, close-up with the ruler for scale. I uploaded them to the same encrypted folder. The data was now locked, time-stamped, and tamper-proof. Phase 1 was complete. Now, Phase 2. The corporate data. Seated at my home workstation, a 3-monitor setup that mirrored my office, I logged into the Harborline VPN. My credentials gave me Tier 1 admin privileges over the risk and audit servers. The silence of my apartment was a weapon. I opened a command line interface. My first action was to execute the silent mirror I had placed on Marla's directories. It was no longer passive monitoring. I initiated an emergency access protocol under Section 8.3 of our corporate governance charter. Suspicion of material financial misconduct by a senior officer. This protocol gave my department, risk control, the right to execute a full read-only mirror of any target directory to prevent the destruction of evidence. I typed the command. The system would now copy every file, every email, every calendar entry in Marla's entire user profile and the HR vendor's share drive to my secure server. It would take hours, but it was already in motion. While the mirror was building, I focused on the existing, flagged files. The Arcadia Wellness Group. The file was thin. The referral name listed on the initial vendor application form was K. Pike. It was meant to look like an individual, a consultant. I ran K. Pike through our firm's deep dive due diligence software, a powerful tool that scrapes state and corporation databases, legal filings, and property records. The result came back in seconds. K. Pike was not a person, it was a holding company. Kestrel and Pike Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware 6 months prior. A shell. A kestrel is a type of hawk. A pike is a predatory fish. Marla was getting poetic and arrogant. I pulled the payment authorizations for Kestrel and Pike. The total was now over $800,000 in 3 months. I sorted by date. The most recent transaction was the one that made my blood run cold. A payment request for $75,000, authorized by Marla's unique digital signature. The authorization timestamp was Sunday, 12:13 p.m., 30 minutes before she slapped me. She had been wiring company money to a shell corporation from her home office, right before coming downstairs to play the role of the perfect host for family lunch. I searched her email archives, now feeding into my mirrored drive. I cross-referenced the payment time. I found the thread. It was an email from Marla to the head of accounts payable, sent at 12:10 p.m. "This is a critical, time-sensitive matter," she wrote. "We are dealing with an acute personnel crisis that requires immediate deployment of Arcadia's resources. I am authorizing an agile payment to bypass the standard net 30. Please execute immediately. I am personally vouching for this." Acute personnel crisis. Agile payment. This was the language of emergency, designed to circumvent process. But there was no supporting documentation, no crisis report, no metrics, no list of affected employees. It was pure executive override, built on a lie. Then came the final, devastating link: the routing and account numbers for Kestrel and Pike Holdings. The KYC software had already flagged the account as high risk due to its recent opening and the layered LLC structure. But I was looking for a name, the beneficiary account, buried 3 layers deep in the LLC's articles of incorporation, wasn't listed under Marla Hale. The name on the account was Genevieve Pike. I didn't recognize it. I opened a separate browser window and ran a deep background search on Marla. Her maiden name was Marla Simmons, but the search brought up family records. Her mother, deceased 10 years. Her name, Arlene Genevieve Pike. Marla had become so bold, so utterly contemptuous of the systems, that she was laundering company money into a shell corporation named after her own dead mother. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it filled the room. This was not a sophisticated fraud. It was a smash and grab, hidden in plain sight, protected only by her title and the sensitivity of her department. My final move was to protect the evidence. Marla was volatile. When she felt cornered, her first instinct would be to delete. I had to assume she would try to scrub the servers. I accessed the system's root controls. I set a digital tripwire, a high-level automated trigger, on the primary HR vendor's directory and on Marla's user profile. The command was simple. If any file in these directories was modified, moved, or deleted, any change at all, the system would instantly take a full snapshot of the directories as they existed at that moment. And more importantly, it would automatically package that snapshot and email it, via a secure, encrypted channel, directly to the managing partner at Orion and Vale, our external auditors, and to Harborline's general counsel, with a Level 1 data integrity breach flag. Any attempt to erase the evidence would become the evidence. I leaned back in my chair. The digital trap was set. The chain of control was complete. The kitchen assault was no longer a separate, private pain. It was the linchpin. It was the psychological profile that contextualized the financial data. It proved the character of the person behind the fraud. Impulsive, abusive, and driven by a profound sense of untouchable power. The slap was the key that unlocked her corporate crimes. It demonstrated a willingness to use force and conceal actions. Whether it was a hand against a face or a signature on a fraudulent wire transfer, she believed no one would ever dare to check her records. And she was wrong. By 4:00 a.m. Monday morning, my apartment was a command center. The city was a dark, sleeping beast outside my floor-to-ceiling windows. But inside, The only light was the cool, blue-white glow of my monitors. The mirrored corporate servers had finished their replication. I had everything. The next 5 hours were about packaging that data into an irrefutable weapon. My first step was to invoke the shield. Harborline Policy 8.3, the Whistleblower Protection Act. Marla had helped write it, another testament to her performative commitment to corporate ethics. I drafted the formal report, my fingers moving across the keyboard with detached precision. The document was cold, clinical, and devoid of personal sentiment. I was not Rowan Hale, daughter. I was R. Hale, head of risk control, employee ID 70741. The subject was not, "My stepmother assaulted me and is stealing money." It was formal notification of material financial irregularities and senior officer misconduct endangering corporate integrity. I structured the report in 3 sections. Section A, Financial Misconduct, detailing the Arcadia Wellness Group, the Shell LLC, the inflated invoices, and the direct flow of funds to an account linked to Marla's family. I embedded hyperlinks to the mirrored payment authorizations and the Kestrel and Pike due diligence report. Section B, Senior Officer Misconduct, which detailed the physical assault. I did not describe it in emotional terms. I described it as a workplace violence incident, citing the company's zero-tolerance policy. I attached the MP4 file from the Nest Bell, the CSV file of my biometric data, and the time-stamped photos of the contusion. I framed it as a critical indicator of the officer's character and judgment, presenting a clear and present danger to the company's ethical and legal standing. Section C, Conflict of Interest. This section laid out the unmanageable conflict between Marla's role as CPO, with fiduciary duties to the company and its employees, and her personal and financial relationship with the CEO. The assault and the fraud were presented as the inevitable outcomes of this structural flaw. At precisely 5:30 a.m., I opened a new email. The recipient list was small but potent. To Arthur Kendrick, the retired federal judge who now served as the independent chairman of Harborline's Audit Committee. To Eleanor Vance, our razor-sharp, notoriously unsentimental general counsel, and via a secure upload portal that bypassed standard email servers, to the lead partner at Orion and Vale, our external auditing firm. The subject line was the same as my report's title. I attached the PDF and all supporting evidence in a single, encrypted zip file. I hit send. The act was irreversible. 3 separate, powerful entities now held the complete package. It could not be buried. It could not be ignored. A formal investigation was now a matter of legal and financial necessity. My next move was to control the battlefield. I sent a separate, direct calendar invitation to Arthur Kendrick and Eleanor Vance. Subject: Urgent, Executive Session of the Audit Committee. Location: Boardroom 3. Time: 9:00 a.m. In the body of the invitation, I wrote one line. Pursuant to my formal notification under Policy 8.3, I request an immediate executive session to discuss time-sensitive material risks, per governance protocols regarding active investigations. All personnel from the Human Resources Department are to be excluded. I had just legally barred Marla from the room where her fate would be decided. With the internal levers pulled, I turned to the external ones, on a separate monitor. I finalized the draft of a formal complaint to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. It detailed the assault, but framed it within the complex web of the family business dynamic, arguing that the unique power structure at Harborline created a uniquely coercive environment. This was my insurance policy. If the board, for some reason, chose to protect my father by protecting Marla, this filing would take the matter out of their hands entirely. I also drafted a short, private memorandum for Eleanor Vance, referencing our obligations under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Harborline had a small, publicly traded subsidiary, a fact not widely known, which meant we were subject to SEC oversight regarding financial reporting. The Arcadia fraud was a material misstatement of our financials. I wasn't just reporting a theft. I was reminding our general counsel of her duty to prevent a federal crime. My presentation for the 9 a.m. meeting was not a narrative. It was a risk matrix. I translated the events of the last 24 hours into the language the board understood. Shareholder value and liability. The matrix filled the main screen. A stark grid of red and orange boxes. Financial risk. Self-enrichment. Vendor fraud. Potential for shareholder lawsuits. Legal and compliance risk. EEOC violations. SEC. Reporting failures. Whistleblower retaliation exposure. Reputational risk. Public scandal. Erosion of brand trust. Loss of employee morale. Operational risk. A compromised HR function. A culture of fear that silences reporting. And the unquantifiable liability of a volatile executive in a position of ultimate trust. The slap was not a family matter. It was a red square in the operational risk quadrant labeled Unstable Leadership. The Arcadia invoices were a red square under financial risk labeled Systemic Control Failure. To ensure the board understood the path forward, I spent an hour creating a confidential succession plan. I identified David Chen, the competent, unflappable VP of Talent Acquisition, as a viable interim head of HR. I outlined a 90-day stabilization plan, including a third-party audit of all HR vendor contracts and the establishment of a truly anonymous employee hotline, managed by an outside firm. I wasn't just bringing them a problem. I was bringing them a detailed, actionable solution. It made the decision to remove Marla not just necessary, but easy. My final technical preparation was the most critical. I called it the clean room. I configured the boardroom's primary AV system to display a secondary, smaller screen in the bottom right corner. This screen was connected directly to my live monitoring feed of Marla's network directories. It displayed a simple, scrolling log of any and all access attempts. If anyone, Marla, her assistant, anyone with their credentials, attempted to access, modify, or delete any of the files related to Arcadia or her vendor payment authorizations, their username and the timestamp would flash in bright red on that screen, in real time, for the entire committee to see. It was a digital bear trap, set in plain sight. The timeline was set. At 10 a.m., Marla was scheduled to lead a company-wide all-hands meeting. The topic, according to the calendar invitations sent out Friday, was a renewed commitment to employee well-being. She was going to stand on a stage and preach about psychological safety to the entire company, funded by the money she was stealing. My meeting was at 9 a.m. I would preempt her performance. I would dismantle her authority before she could ever reach the microphone. As the first pale light of dawn began to cut through the darkness, I shut down my monitors. The plan was complete. The evidence was locked. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was walk into the lion's den and present the facts. The hours between 5:30 a.m. and my departure for the office were a deep-sea dive into the wreckage of Marla's digital life. With the mirrored servers fully replicated, I had a perfect, isolated copy of her entire corporate existence. My task was to dismantle the facade of Arcadia Wellness, piece by piece. I started with the invoices. They were templates, generic and vague, filled with corporate buzzwords. Each one billed Harborline for group therapeutic counseling sessions or executive stress mitigation workshops. The line item costs were astronomical, but the descriptions of services rendered were gossamer thin. Crucially, there were no names, no professional license numbers, no certifications for the supposed counselors or therapists who had provided these services. For a company spending nearly $1 million on healthcare, this was not just an oversight. It was a screaming red flag. It was like buying a fleet of trucks without checking for engines. I pulled the documents Marla had submitted to the audit committee to justify the program. Attached was a sample syllabus for an advanced anti-violence and de-escalation workshop. The facilitator, the document proudly stated, was Marla Hale herself. I cross-referenced this with the Arcadia invoices, and there it was, on the same dates that Marla had conducted her mandatory, company-wide training. Arcadia Wellness had billed Harborline a facilitator's fee of $25,000 per session, She was using a shell company to pay herself for doing her own job, laundering her salary through a fraudulent vendor under the guise of employee wellness. The deception went deeper. Each workshop invoice from Arcadia came with an attached attendance roster. I picked one from 6 weeks ago. The list contained 47 employee names and ID numbers. My first step was to cross-reference the IDs against our active employee database. Of the 47 names on the list, 12 had not worked for Harborline for over a year. She had padded the attendance lists with ghost employees, former workers whose data was still dormant in an old HR system, to inflate the headcount and justify the exorbitant fees. She was billing us for counseling sessions with people who weren't even there, conducted by a therapist who didn't exist, and facilitated by herself. The money trail was next. I had already established the link from Harborline to Arcadia Wellness Group, and from Arcadia to the Kestrel and Pike LLC. Now I needed to trace it to its final destination. My firm's due diligence software had access to certain banking forensics databases. I initiated a trace on the Kestrel and Pike account. The flow was clean, designed for speed, not stealth. Money arrived from Arcadia and was immediately transferred out, typically within the same business day, to a single destination, an account linked to a premium, unlimited benefits credit card, a black card. The name on the account was not Marla Hale. It was Marla Simmons, her maiden name, the name she hadn't used officially in over a decade. It was her identity before she became the CPO, before she became my father's wife. It was the ghost she used to collect her money. With the core of the financial fraud mapped out, I started digging for intent. A good fraudster doesn't leave a written confession. An arrogant one does. I ran a deep keyword search on her mirrored email drive, but I wasn't looking in her inbox or sent items. I was looking in the shadows, the drafts folder, the deleted items, the auto-saved recovery files. And I found it, an email that was never sent, auto-saved 2 months ago, the day before the audit committee first queried the Arcadia spending. It was addressed to her executive assistant. The text was short and chillingly direct. Before the Orion and Vale preliminary review tomorrow, I need you to go into the shared calendar and delete the logs for all my executive strategy meetings from the past quarter. Relabel them as Arcadia Pilot Program Sessions. We need a clean paper trail. It was the smoking gun, a direct, written order to falsify corporate records for the express purpose of deceiving our external auditors. It was unambiguous, premeditated, and an act of criminal obstruction. The assistant had evidently complied, but Marla had never deleted the draft, an act of supreme sloppiness born from absolute confidence. The digital ghosts weren't just in her email. On a hunch, I logged into the family's smart home account. My access was still active from when I'd set up the system for Dad. I navigated to the kitchen's smart speaker. It kept a rolling 7-day log of all voice commands. I scrolled back to Sunday, 12:43 p.m. There, sandwiched between commands for a dinner playlist, was a single, stark entry. Timestamp, 12:43:17 p.m. The command was spoken in Marla's voice, sharp and clipped. Turn up music. The timestamp was exactly 4 seconds after the Nest Bell camera had recorded the sound of the slap. She had struck me, and her first, instinctual act was to use a voice command to create auditory cover, to try and drown out any potential aftermath. It was a small detail, but it was profoundly revealing. It showed a mind that was constantly, instinctively working to conceal. There was one last piece of the puzzle, the name of the shell company, Kestrel and Pike. Pike was her mother's middle name, but Kestrel felt specific, not random. I expanded my background search on Marla, digging back to her first marriage, the one that ended before she ever met my father. I pulled the public domain divorce records, and there it was, buried in a footnote about asset division. During a contentious period of the divorce, she had legally, and temporarily, operated under an alias to shield assets from her former husband. The alias she had registered with the state of Nevada was Kestrel Investigations. The circle was complete. The name of her shell company wasn't just a random choice. It was a callback to a previous life, a previous deception. It was a private joke, a nod to her own history of duplicity. The final piece of the puzzle came not from a server, but from the public domain. Marla's social media presence was a carefully curated gallery of her perfect life. I scrolled through her Instagram feed. 3 weeks ago, on the exact dates that Arcadia Wellness had billed Harborline for a 3-day, intensive on-site crisis counseling retreat for warehouse supervisors, Marla had posted a series of glowing photos. They showed her laughing with friends at a 5-star spa and resort at Lake Halberd. The caption read, "Taking a much-needed wellness retreat to recharge. Self-care isn't selfish, it's essential. Wellness-blessed leadership." I put the photo from her Instagram side by side with the invoice from Arcadia on my monitor. On the left, Marla in a plush white robe, holding a champagne flute, overlooking a pristine lake. On the right, a charge to Harborline Logistics for over $150,000 for the mental health crisis of her employees. I leaned back, the timeline laid bare across my screens, the flow of money out of the company, the faked workshops, the ghost employees, the social media posts flaunting her stolen wealth, the draft email ordering a cover-up, the voice command to mask an assault. It was all one, single, continuous story. This was never just about a slap in the kitchen. That was merely a symptom of the disease. The conclusion was no longer a theory. It was a fact, supported by a mountain of irrefutable data. This was a sophisticated, multi-layered model of self-enrichment, masterfully disguised in the compassionate, unassailable language of corporate wellness. Marla hadn't just broken the rules. She had weaponized the very concept of safety and turned it into her personal slush fund. I arrived at the executive suite at 8:45 a.m. My father's longtime assistant, a woman who has known me since I was a child, looked up from her desk, her practiced professional smile faltering for a fraction of a second. She saw the bruise on my cheek, now a muted tapestry of purple and blue. She said nothing about it, her training kicking in. "Rowan, your father isn't expecting you." "I know," I said. "Tell him I have the preliminary data on the Q3 risk assessment. It's time-sensitive." It was a plausible lie. Corporate speak that would grant me access. She hesitated, then nodded and buzzed his office. I walked in without waiting for an answer. My father's office is his sanctuary, dark mahogany, the scent of old leather and his faint, spicy cologne. A vast, floor-to-ceiling window overlooks the main logistics hub, a sprawling city of trucks, containers, and warehouses. It is the view of a king surveying his kingdom. He was standing by that window, a mug of coffee in his hand, looking down at the empire he had built. He turned, his face set in lines of annoyance. "This couldn't have waited for our one-on-one next week," he began. I walked to the center of the room and stood before his massive desk. I placed my tablet on the polished wood. "I'm not here to apologize for yesterday," I said, my voice as flat and even as the surface of the desk. "I'm here with data." A flicker of anger crossed his face. He wanted the family drama. He wanted contrition, an emotional explanation, something he could manage and dismiss. I was denying him that. I was forcing a different context. "Marla has poured her life into building the culture of this company," he said, his voice low and dangerous. It was a warning shot. He was defending his wife, his choice, the reality he had constructed. "With the company's own money," I replied, my gaze unwavering. I tapped the screen of the tablet. The video file was already queued. I hit play. There was no dramatic preamble, just the 7 seconds of high-definition footage from the kitchen, the wide, sterile angle, the blur of her arm, the ugly, unmistakable sound of the slap, followed by the thud of my head hitting the refrigerator. My father stood frozen. He stared at the small screen on his desk as if it were an alien artifact. He didn't look at me, at my bruised face. He looked at the recording, at the raw, undeniable proof. It was as if someone had reached into the room and ripped down a thick, velvet curtain that had been hanging there for years, exposing the cold, harsh light of reality behind it, the carefully crafted image of his life, of his perfect second marriage, flickered and died in those 7 seconds. He finally tore his eyes from the screen, his face pale. He was grasping for a defense, for a way to put this back in a box he could control. That is a private, family matter. Rowan, his voice was a strained whisper. He was trying to build a firewall between the man in that video and the CEO of Harborline Logistics. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply swiped the screen. The video vanished, replaced by a screenshot of the payment authorization from the ERP system, a single line item, highlighted in red. Vendor, Arcadia Wellness Group. Amount, $75,000. Authorizing signature, Marla Hale. Timestamp, Sunday, 12:13 p.m. I tapped the red line with my index finger. And this, I said, my voice cutting through the silence, is a shareholder matter. That was it. That was the precise, targeted strike on the tempered glass. I saw the impact. His eyes darted from the tablet to my face and back again. His hand, the one that wasn't holding the coffee mug, began to tremble. It was a slight, almost imperceptible tremor, but in the crushing silence of the office, it was a seismic event. The crack had appeared. It was spreading out from the weakest point in his entire worldview, his blind trust. He, Graham Hale, the master of control, the man who demanded data and accountability from every corner of his empire, had handed the keys to the company's moral and financial integrity to a thief. He had outsourced his conscience to the wrong person. He sank into his large leather chair, the air leaving his lungs in a soft whoosh. He stared at the screen, but I knew he wasn't seeing the numbers anymore. He was seeing the entire rotten structure he had allowed to be built in his own house, in his own company. I taught you not to hold grudges, he murmured, his voice thick with a strange mix of accusation and despair. He was trying to reframe this as a personal vendetta, a daughter's revenge. It was his last line of defense. I'm not, I said softly, but with the hardness of steel beneath the words. I'm reporting, as is my duty, as outlined in the code of conduct she wrote. The finality of my tone seemed to break something in him. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a dawning, terrible clarity. He saw me not as his daughter, but as a force he could not control, a system of logic that was now in motion and could not be stopped. What if they reject this? He asked, his voice barely audible. It was a plea. He was asking for an exit, a way out of the abyss. I gave him none. Then the evidence package I've already prepared goes to the EOC, the SEC, and the Wall Street Journal. I said. There was no malice in my voice. It was a simple statement of fact, a process outcome. There was no scenario where this stayed buried. The only variable left was how much damage the company would sustain. I watched him absorb the checkmate. The fight went out of him, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. He was trapped by the consequences of his own willful ignorance. In that moment, for the first time in years, I saw the man, not the CEO, a man who had made a catastrophic error in judgment and was only now understanding its full cost. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of surrender, a quiet, devastating acknowledgement of the truth. It was the invisible signature on a document of capitulation. I didn't offer a hand. I didn't hug him. This was not a moment for familial comfort. This was a corporate restructuring. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. I placed it on the desk next to the tablet. This is a provisional succession plan for the CPO role, I said. It outlines a 90-day transition to an interim leader and a full independent audit of HR vendor protocols. It will stabilize the department and reassure the board. He stared at the folder as if it were a snake. He finally raised his eyes to meet mine. The anger was gone. The denial was gone. All that was left was a vast, empty space. He had built an empire of glass, and it was about to shatter. Go to the boardroom, Rowan, he said, his voice a hollow echo in the grand office. It was a dismissal, and an order to proceed. The clock on the boardroom wall read 8:59 a.m. The air was heavy, pressurized. Arthur Kendrick, the audit committee chairman, sat at the head of the polished table, his face an impassive judicial mask. Eleanor Vance, our general counsel, sat to his right, a stack of folders neatly squared before her. My father sat to his left, his face gray, staring at his own reflection in the dark wood. The other committee members were dialed in, their faces silent, watchful squares on the main telepresence screen. I sat at the far end, my laptop open, my pulse a steady, metronomic 65 beats per minute. At 9 a.m. on the dot, the heavy door swung open. Marla entered, a whirlwind of confident energy and expensive perfume. She was in her power uniform, a sharp, cream-colored pantsuit, her hair perfect. She smiled brightly at the room, radiating executive charisma. She was holding her corporate tablet. Arthur, Eleanor, Graham, she greeted them warmly, taking her usual seat. She didn't look at me, as if I were a piece of furniture, a low-level analyst there to take notes. "I'm so glad we could sync before my all hands," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "I was just putting the finishing touches on my presentation. The Q3 numbers on our wellness initiative are extraordinary. I've titled the deck, 'Wellness Saves Us Millions.'" She smiled, a practiced, camera-ready smile, glancing at the small internal camera in the corner of the room that recorded all high-level meetings for the corporate archive. "Thank you for joining us, Marla," Arthur Kendrick said, his voice flat, cutting through her performance. "Before you begin, Ms. Hale has invoked Policy 8.3 and requested the floor for an emergency risk briefing." Marla's smile tightened. Her eyes flicked to me, a flash of pure, unadulterated venom. The idea of me, the child, preempting her was an insult, but she recomposed instantly, turning her expression into one of mild, professional curiosity. "Rowan? Of course. Please, proceed." She tapped her tablet, ready to take notes, the picture of a supportive CPO. I didn't stand. I picked up my remote and activated the main screen. My first slide was a simple, blank gray. In the bottom right corner, a small, black window appeared. It looked like a meaningless diagnostic log, just a scrolling feed of system data. This was the clean room. "My report concerns a critical vulnerability in our HR vendor management protocols and a severe breach of executive conduct," I began, my voice clear and cold in the quiet room. Given the nature of the data, my first action upon discovery was to implement a full preservation of evidence protocol on the relevant servers. As the word evidence left my mouth, 3 lines of text flashed in bright red in the clean room window. User, K. Morris, exec ast CPO. Attempted access. Dear, HR vendors Arcadia FYQ3. User, K. Morris, exec ast CPO. Attempted access. Dear, HR vendors Arcadia invoices. User, K. Morris, exec ast CPO. Attempted access. Dear, H. vendors Kestrel, Pike. Marla's executive assistant, K. Morris, was trying to access the files. Right now, Marla had clearly instructed her to enter the system as soon as this meeting began, likely to delete the records while she kept the committee distracted. I paused, letting Arthur Kendrick and Eleanor Vance read the lines on the screen. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. She understood immediately. I was showing them a cover-up in progress. "As I was saying," I continued, "a system of preservation is critical, because it appears someone is actively trying to access those very files at this precise moment." Marla's head snapped toward the small window. She couldn't understand what she was seeing, but she recognized her assistant's username. A flicker of panic, the first tiny crack in her composure. I clicked to the next slide. It was a simple, brutal flowchart, a box labeled Harborline Logistics at the top, an arrow pointing down to Arcadia Wellness Group, UPS Store Mailbox, a second arrow from Arcadia to Kestrel and Pike Holdings, LLC, Delaware Shell, and a final, thick red arrow pointing to a box that read, Amex Black Got Card, ACCT, M. Simmons, Maiden. Beside the flowchart, I placed two images side by side. One was the $150,000 invoice from Arcadia for an on-site crisis counseling retreat. The other was Marla's Instagram post from the same date, champagne flute in hand, at the Lake Halberd Spa. For the last 90 days, I said, narrating the data, our chief people officer has authorized over $800,000 in fraudulent, non-deliverable wellness services, funneling the money through a multi-layered shell corporation which she controls, registered under her mother's family name and her own prior legal alias. She is, in effect, stealing from the company to fund her personal lifestyle, and hiding it under the budget she herself declared too sensitive for standard audits. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum being created. Marla's face had gone from panicked to a mask of white-hot rage. This is an outrage, Marla's voice was sharp. A weapon. It's a fabrication. This is nothing but a slanderous, personal attack from a vindictive... The main boardroom door clicked open. Marla stopped, mid-sentence. Two men in dark suits entered. I recognized them instantly. James Valenti and Sarah Lynn from Orion and Vale, our external auditors. They were not smiling. They walked to the wall and stood there. Silent observers. Their presence a formal declaration of war. Marla's blood drained from her face. She looked from the auditors to Arthur Kendrick. Fabrication. Marla? Arthur's voice was like gravel. He had received my 5:30 a.m. package. He had made the call. We find the data to be compelling. In fact, we found it so compelling that we've had Orion and Vale on a 6 o'clock a.m. call, and they agree. This is a material event. This was twist one. The cavalry was already here. Kendrick reached into his portfolio and slid a single white envelope across the table. It stopped directly in front of Marla. That is a pre-drafted resignation agreement, effective immediately, Kendrick said. It was composed by legal counsel last night. It includes a full non-disclosure agreement and a clawback of your last 2 years of bonuses. Sign it now, and we can handle this as an internal matter. Refuse, and this committee will vote, right now, on your immediate and public termination for cause. The room held its breath. Marla stared at the envelope as if it were a bomb. I could see her mind racing, calculating the odds, the angles. She looked at my father, her eyes wide, pleading for him to intervene, to save her. My father said nothing. He just stared at the grain of the wood in front of him, his face a stone mask. He had made his choice in his office, an hour ago. Marla's expression hardened. She was cornered. But she wasn't broken. She was a fighter. You can't, she whispered, a threat in her voice. You can't prove intent. She was rallying, trying to build a legal defense. She was betting that the data was just data, that she could argue it was a misunderstanding, a complex vendor relationship. I still had one more slide. Intent? I asked, my voice cutting in. I clicked the remote. The screen changed, displaying a perfect screenshot of an email, a draft, saved in her folder, addressed to K. Morris, subject, prep for O&V, body. Before the Orion and Vale preliminary review tomorrow, I need you to go into the shared calendar and delete the logs for all my executive strategy meetings. Relabel them as Arcadia Pilot Program sessions. We need a clean paper trail. This, I said, is a direct written order to your assistant to falsify corporate records to deceive our external auditors. The same assistant who, as we all saw, was just trying to access these files. Marla's eyes widened in disbelief. She looked down at her own tablet, the one she was holding, the one that was still wirelessly connected to the corporate network. She realized where I'd gotten the draft. Her fingers started moving across her screen. A frantic, panicked scramble. She was trying to delete it, right now. This was twist 2, the trap I had set. I didn't have to say a word. As she furiously typed, a new window popped up on the main screen, a system-generated alert that I had routed to the boardroom display. System alert. Attempted delete blocked. Dear user M. Hale drafts. User M. Hale. Action. Delete permanent protocol. 8.3 litigation hold status. Blocked. Snapshot of attempt captured and forwarded to General Counsel and Audit Chair. The entire room watched, in real time, as Marla's own tablet betrayed her. The system had not only blocked her attempt to destroy the evidence, it had taken a screenshot of the attempt itself and automatically emailed it to Eleanor Vance and Arthur Kendrick. Eleanor looked down at her phone as the email buzzed through. She looked up, first at Marla, then at me. It was a look of cold, professional respect. Total, crushing silence descended on the room. It lasted 5 full seconds. Marla was frozen, her hand still on her tablet. She was no longer a CPO. She was no longer my father's wife. She was just a criminal caught in a digital net. My father finally spoke. His voice was a low rumble. He didn't look at Marla. He looked at Arthur Kendrick. The decision, he said. It was all he needed to say. He slowly, deliberately, rapped his knuckles on the table. Tap, tap, tap. It was the signal. It was time to vote. All in favor of immediate termination for cause, Arthur said, his voice a gavel. His hand went up. Eleanor's hand went up. The hands of the committee members on the video screen went up, one by one. My father's hand was the last. It rose slowly, heavily, a terrible weight attached to it, but it went up. The motion carries, Arthur said. Marla Hale is removed as Chief People Officer of Harbor Line Logistics, effective immediately. Security, please escort Ms. Hale from the premises. The aftermath was not loud. It was a study in quiet, brutal efficiency. 2 corporate security officers, men I recognized from the lobby, entered the boardroom. They did not touch Marla. They simply stood by the door, their presence a silent, immovable fact. She looked at them, then at my father, her face a canvas of disbelief turning to stone. She picked up her tablet and her expensive leather portfolio, stood, and walked out of the room without another word. The door clicked shut behind her, a sound of absolute finality. On the small clean room screen, a new set of system alerts scrolled by in a calm, orderly green. User M. Hale. Access deactivated. User M. Hale. Network credentials revoked. User M. Hale. Email account archived. Forwarding protocol enacted to interim CPO. The system was faster than she was. By the time the elevator doors opened for her in the lobby, she would be a ghost. Her digital existence at Harbor Line Logistics completely and irrevocably erased. Eleanor Vance, the General Counsel, didn't wait. Arthur, she said to the chairman, with the board's consent, I will package the full evidentiary file from Ms. Hale's report. It will be transmitted to the U.S. Attorney's Office, Division of Economic Crimes. By noon today, the charge will be wire fraud. Kendrick nodded. Do it. I also want a company-wide communication drafted. Full transparency. We have a failure of internal controls at the highest level. We will acknowledge it. We will explain the immediate corrective actions being taken, and we will announce David Chen as the acting CPO, effective immediately. The machine was moving. The gears of corporate justice, once set in motion, were grinding forward with unstoppable force. The meeting was over. The members on the screen blinked out one by one. The auditors from Orion and Vale gave a curt nod and departed. Soon, it was just my father and me in the vast, silent room. He didn't speak for a long time. He just sat there, staring at the empty chair where Marla had been. The ghost of her presence, her perfume, her power, still lingered in the air. Finally, he pushed himself to his feet and walked slowly over to where I was sitting. He stood before me, not as a CEO, but as a man adrift in the wreckage of his own life. Where? He asked, his voice low and raspy, stripped of its usual authority. Did I go wrong, Rowan? It wasn't a rhetorical question. He was asking for a data point, a root cause analysis of his own failure. I met his gaze directly. The bruise on my cheek throbbed with a dull, distant ache. "You started trusting the speeches more than the spreadsheets," I said. "You let the culture become a narrative instead of a set of measurable controls. You listened to what she said, and you stopped looking at what she did." He absorbed the words, letting them land. There was no defense, no argument. He simply nodded, a slow, tired acknowledgement of a fundamental truth he had ignored for years. "That changes. Starting today," he said. It was a vow. He looked at the folder I had brought, the succession plan, still sitting on the table. "That plan you made, I want it on my desk in an hour. I want you to personally oversee the transition, and I want you to draft a new charter for the Wellness Benefits Program. New controls, new oversight, new vendors. Build it from the ground up. Build it so this can never happen again." It was the biggest assignment of my career, handed to me in the smoking ruins of my family. "I will," I said, "on one condition, the full amount recovered from the Arcadia accounts, and any funds clawed back from Marla's compensation, will be placed in a new, segregated employee assistance fund. It will be used to provide actual, legitimate, third-party vetted therapeutic resources for our people. The money she stole to fake their wellness will be used to pay for their real recovery." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of the man who had built this company, a glimmer of respect. "Done," he said. As if on cue, Eleanor Vance re-entered the room, her phone to her ear. She held up a hand to my father. "One moment. Graham, this is interesting." She listened for another few seconds, a small, grim smile playing on her lips. "I see. Yes, that clause. Thank you." She hung up. "That was outside counsel, reviewing Marla's prenuptial agreement," she said, looking at both of us. She had a very robust alimony and asset split clause. However, it was all contingent upon a standard no disparagement and moral turpitude clause. The agreement is void if either party brings public shame or legal liability upon the other. She paused for effect. Felony wire fraud, it turns out, is a textbook violation. The board's legal position is that she gets nothing. Her entire claim on his personal assets was predicated on a lie. It was the final, perfect, legalistic twist of the knife. Her personal safety net was interwoven with her corporate one, and both had been set ablaze by her own greed. My father just shook his head, a man overwhelmed. He walked to the vast window and looked out at his kingdom of trucks and warehouses below, a lonely, isolated figure. I walked to the other side of the room, to the floor-to-ceiling glass panel that was, in fact, a door. I pushed the heavy chrome handle. The seal broke with a soft hiss, and the door swung open onto a small, railed balcony. A rush of cool, crisp autumn air flooded the sterile boardroom. It carried the scent of wet leaves and, faintly, the smell of diesel and hot rubber from the truck yard far below. It was the smell of the real company, the working company, the one that existed beyond the speeches and the presentations. It was the smell of reality, and it felt like breathing for the first time all day. The pressure in the room, the years of unspoken tension, vented out into the open sky. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a secure text from Eleanor Vance. Snapshot of termination vote and supporting evidence submitted to us attorney's office. The record is filed. I typed back a single word, acknowledged. I stood there for a moment, letting the wind blow against my face. Then I went back inside, took out my phone, and opened my calendar. I found the recurring weekly appointment that had been there for a decade. Sunday family lunch. I pressed and held. A small menu popped up. Delete this and all future events. I pressed it. The entry vanished. Then, I created a new recurring appointment. Weekly audit. Wellness vendor controls. As I closed the door and prepared to leave the room, I caught my reflection in the dark glass. The bruise on my cheek was no longer an angry purple. It was beginning to fade, shifting to a muted, yellowish green. A record of a past event. I realized that the only two things I was taking with me from my father's house yesterday were this fading proof of a debt settled, and the keys to a cleaner, more honest company. That afternoon, the employee parking lot felt like a different world. The sky, which had been a low, oppressive gray all morning, had been scoured clean. It was a vast, brilliant, cloudless blue, so clear and deep it felt synthetic, like a freshly wiped system log. The air was crisp, tasting of distant rain and the metallic tang of industry. The low, constant rumble of the logistics hub, the hydraulic sigh of container lifts, the beep, beep, beep of reversing trucks, the distant roar of an engine firing to life, wasn't noise, it was a pulse. The steady, powerful heartbeat of the real company, the one that ran on diesel and data, sweat and schedules. I sat in my car for a long time, doing nothing, just listening. The tension of the morning, the years of coiled spring vigilance, were finally beginning to unspool from my muscles. There was no elation, no thrill of victory. Tearing down a rotten structure isn't a celebration, it's a necessary demolition. What was left was a profound, quiet emptiness, the space where the fight used to be. My phone buzzed, the vibrations stark against the silence in the car. It was my father. I let it ring twice before answering, my own small act of recalibrating our dynamic. "Hello?" I said, my voice neutral. There was a long pause on the other end, filled with the sound of his breathing. He sounded tired, older than he had this morning. "What's for dinner tonight?" he asked. The question was so mundane, so utterly normal, that it was jarring. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He wasn't trying to rehash the day's cataclysm. He was asking if a protocol, the one of shared meals and forced family time, was still in effect. He was asking what the new rules were. I thought for a moment, looking out at the endless blue sky. "Honesty," I said. A sound came from his end of the line. It wasn't quite a laugh, more like a sharp, weary exhalation of breath that had been held for a very long time, a sound of surrender. "All right," he said, his voice rough. "All right," and he hung up. I didn't smile, but I felt the final gear of the old machine grind to a halt, and the first gear of a new one click quietly into place. I flipped down the sun visor and looked at my reflection in the small, rectangular mirror. The bruise on my cheek was a ghost of its former self. The violent red and purple had faded, replaced by a pale yellowish-green shadow. The color of old paper, it was no longer an injury, it was an artifact, a piece of physical evidence that had been logged, processed, and rendered obsolete by a more permanent, more powerful digital record. The mark on my skin would fade, but the mark on the corporate ledger would last forever. As I was about to put the car in gear, my phone lit up again. It wasn't a call, but a company-wide push notification, the kind of alert Marla used to send out for mandatory meetings. But the title was different. Internal Memorandum, a new era of transparency. The text below was concise, authored by Arthur Kendrick and my father. It announced the immediate departure of Marla Hale, the appointment of an interim CPO, and the launch of a full, independent third-party audit of all executive-level vendor contracts. It ended with a single, powerful sentence. Harbor Line Logistics is fundamentally committed to a culture of absolute accountability, where process is our promise and transparency is our foundation. I read the words, and it felt like a door locking behind me. The official record had been amended. The truth, my truth, was now the company's truth. I put the phone down, the screen going dark. I pushed open the car door and stepped out. A gust of wind swept across the vast, open lot, sharp and clean. It caught my employee ID badge, clipped to my jacket, and made it flutter. The sound a soft, rhythmic tapping against my chest. The wind of change. There was no catharsis in the Hollywood sense, no tearful reunion with my father, no dramatic embrace where all was forgiven. There was no performative reconciliation, no pretending that the shattered glass could be seamlessly glued back together. Our relationship would not be one of warmth, but one of mutual, wary respect, built on the hard, cold foundation of verifiable data, we would not be a happy family, but we might, finally, be an honest one. Later that night, I would file my final, closing report on the investigation. It would be a simple, one-page document, summarizing the findings, the actions taken, and the resolution. It was a formality, a last entry to close out the case file. But I would add one final line at the bottom, a new mantra for the company and for myself, a single sentence that would serve as the closing stamp on the entire affair. We don't hold grudges, we hold records. The screen goes black. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know your thoughts, and if you're comfortable sharing, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And for extra support, hitting that hype button really helps the algorithm share this story with even more listeners. Thank you again for being here.